Kia ora, welcome back. It's now time to focus more closely on the firm's supply curve, and what we're going to find out in this particular unit is that costs are the main determinant, if you like, of the supply curve, and changes in costs will affect the supply curve. And we are also going to see how we can derive an individual firm supply curve from what is known as shutdown point. So I hope you're ready, because first we have to look at some vocabulary as usual, and this is critical to be able to understand and go deeper into the topic. So make sure that when you're doing your vocabulary, write it down, find similar meaning words, review it regularly. Right, our first word that we're looking at is the word returns, and the easiest way to remember what it is output. And there's a close correlation between resources or inputs that are used to produce the output or returns and costs of production. So as you can see, as resources are put into the production process, they will contribute to the output of goods and services. But each resource is not only an input that helps produce something, but it's also a cost to the business. So every time the business employs, say, another unit of labor or another machine, costs rise. And so we need to look closely at this before we can understand the importance of costs. Now we're going to introduce the idea of increasing and diminishing returns, and remembering returns is referring to the output that is produced by another unit of input. And of course we need to look at the concept of marginal output. Remember that it's the extra output that results from adding another input. Put another unit of labor in, what happens to total output? Does it go up? Does it go up faster than the previous? So the marginal value, remember, measures the gradient or the change in the total value. So business add more inputs. How does the output change? Does it increase faster or at a slower rate? If it increases faster, in other words, the marginal output will go up. We say the firm is experiencing increasing returns. And of course, if you add another input and total output increases at a slower rate than the previous units, then we say marginal output is decreasing and the firm is experiencing diminishing returns. We also can measure average output. Remember, that is the total output divided by the number of workers, and the aim of the firm is to increase the average output so that each unit of labor will cost less. The law of diminishing returns, and remembering a law is always true under certain circumstances. And here we're going to find out that the law of diminishing returns, it always operates in the short run time period. And remember, the short run is where at least one of the inputs the firm needs to increase production is not available. So as more resources or inputs are added to one that is in fixed supply, the marginal or extra output will sooner or later will eventually begin to decrease or diminish. A well-known saying that's still used now and then is that if you have too many people in the production process, that you will end up finding it quite difficult to produce what you need to produce. And so the expression, too many cooks spoil the broth being the soup or the dish that's being prepared. I always remember when one of the first houses we bought in Auckland, the kitchen was a very small space, and it was okay for one person or maybe two people, but as soon as you added a third person into the kitchen to do something, nobody could get anything done properly. So that would be very much an illustration of the law of diminishing returns. Now this table here is an example of both increasing and diminishing returns. We can see that land is fixed in supply. There's only 1 hectare available. And the manager has to organise his workers, because what he's going to do, he's going to add workers to the land, but there's only a fixed amount. And so you can see total output goes up faster and then reaches the high point and then decreases. And remember that the marginal value measures the change in the total. And so as we do our calculations, remember the second unit from the first, the change in the total, and the average, of course, is the total divided by the number of workers. So putting in the values, we can see that as workers are added to the production process, the marginal output here goes up to reach a maximum. Through here, it reaches a maximum of 29. And then it begins to decrease. And remember our definitions: increasing returns in the short run, where 1 unit is fixed, adding other units to it of inputs. What happens? The marginal output goes up, and we can see it goes from 0 through to 29, and then begins to decrease. As we said, that the law of diminishing return states as you add more inputs to others that are in a fixed supply, the marginal output will sooner or later will eventually begin to decrease. So here we have an example of the law of diminishing returns. Remember, it's only working in the short run. You have to have 1 unit fixed. Of course, if the firm could get more land, then it could continue to add workers to the production process and see marginal output increase. Some students ask me, well, how come when you add 1 worker, you only produces 4, but you add 2, and he more than doubles together working? Well, this is because, remember that as you work in a team, you can devise ways where you specialise, so you do what you're best at, and organise yourselves in such a way that you can increase your output by more than the previous unit. But eventually, unless the firm can get more land, this is not going to happen, and the marginal output will always decrease. These questions then, to summarise: when is the firm experiencing increasing returns? Well, when marginal output is increasing, so from 0 to 4 workers. As soon as you add the 5th worker, marginal output decreases, diminishing returns. So if you were organising these workers, how many would you employ? The answer is 4. And of course, the last question, the law of diminishing returns only operates in the short run, because at least 1 factor has to be fixed in supply. If you would like some graphing practice, you can plot the change in total output compared to the marginal output, remembering that the output is on the vertical axis this time and the number of workers is on the horizontal or x-axis.